Let's explore React design patterns. This presentation will cover common patterns and best practices for building scalable and maintainable React applications. Let's understand the difference between container and presentational components. Container components handle the logic, state management, and data fetching. Presentational components focus on user interface rendering and visual presentation. Here's an example of a container component called user_list_container. This component uses the useState hook to manage a list of users and a loading state. It uses the useEffect hook to fetch users when the component mounts and then sets the loading state to false. Finally, it renders the user list component, passing the users and loading state as props. Here's an example of a presentational component called user_list. This component receives users and loading as props. If loading is true, it displays loading. Otherwise, it renders an unordered list of user names. Let's dive into higher-order components. These are functions that take a component and return a new component with enhanced functionality. The key benefits of using higher-order components are code reusability, logic separation, and addressing cross-cutting concerns. Here's an example of a higher-order component called withAuth. This function takes a wrapped component as an argument. It then defines an isAuthenticated variable using the useAuth hook. If the user is not authenticated, it renders a login form. Otherwise, it renders the wrapped component, passing along any props. Now let's explore the render props pattern. Render props are components that use a function prop to determine what to render. Key features of the render props pattern include dynamic rendering, data sharing, and flexible user interface logic. Here's an example of a render props component called mouse. This component takes a render prop. It uses the useState hook to store the x and y coordinates of the mouse position. It defines a handle mouse move function that updates the position state when the mouse moves. Finally, it returns a div that calls the render prop, passing in the current mouse position. Let's talk about custom hooks. The custom hook pattern allows you to extract component logic into reusable functions. Here's an example of a custom hook called useCounter. This hook uses the useState hook to store a counter value. It also defines functions to increment, decrement, and reset the counter. Finally, it returns an object containing the counter value and the functions to modify it. Here is a summary of key best practices. Separation of concerns involves keeping logic and presentation separate. Code reusability encourages sharing common functionality across components. Custom hooks help to extract and share stateful logic. And component composition involves building complex user interfaces from simple components. If you like this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Visit CodeLucky.com for more such useful content.